Hi, my name's Dustin Winslow, and I will be telling you about Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Um, this book was written in 1937 during World War II by Dietrich Bonhoeffer himself, and it is the fourth volume of the works that were rewritten from German into English. Um, so, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian from the 1900s. He was born in 1906 to a wealthy, well off German family who highly revered education. And so Dietrich went to college and received his bachelor's and master's degree in the University of Tübingen, and then went on to receive his doctorate in theology in 1927 from a university in Berlin. Dietrich was well educated and well revered in the Christian community, and his siblings were known for their serious faith, as well as their seriousness against Nazi Germany. And at 24 years old, Dietrich moved to New York City to do some postgraduate work at Union Seminary in New York City. And this is where he fell in love with the African American Christian church. He saw community bent on real closeness regarding sin and regarding grace and regarding Jesus Christ. And he loved that about the African American church in America, in New York City. So a year later, he moved back to Germany and was teaching systematic theology in Berlin when he was ordained into the Lutheran Church. About a year passed, and the Nazi Party rose up and came to rule over Germany, and Dietrich was actually on the radio at one point, publicly addressing the German people to oppose Nazi Germany and to be very careful of Hitler, saying that he would be a seducer that leads the people away. The radio line was cut and he was cut off the air. But anyways, he was openly in opposition against the Nazi party, and this was a huge deal. A couple of years passed, and the Nazi party invaded the church. So they began to take over the church and make moves to promote Aryan lifestyle within the church. So this would pertain to banishing anyone that was a pastor that was of any Jewish descent. And it was also looking to unhitch from the Old Testament covenant, which is a huge necessity to the gospel. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was adamantly fighting against this, but only 20% of other pastors from the churches in Germany were in support with Dietrich to oppose this. So eventually the laws were passed, and the Nazi Party took over the church. A very unfortunate time. So the church was ravaged with heresy and with just evil. So what happened next was Dietrich moved to London and joined up with the Covenant Community Church and was just learning. And he moved back to Germany. He opened a underground seminary in Berlin. He was then banned from Berlin. He moved to the United States, and with a lot of remorse ended up moving back to Germany to be with his kin as they suffered under the hand of the Nazi Party. He joined a plot to overthrow Hitler, which later led to his imprisonment and execution in 1945 at the age of 39. So the next question, that I'll be going over is what was the argument of the book and what was Bonhoeffer really getting at with this book. The three things that I really saw very evidently boiled down to he was trying to stir Christ proclaimers to the distinct lifestyle of a narrow path disciple of Jesus Christ. That breaks down into 3 points of costly grace, a discipleship lifestyle based on the calling of Jesus, and a church that's strong in the righteousness of God. So that first point was costly grace, and when he expanded on this, it was so important to him that people did not cheapen the grace of Jesus Christ. People are bought with a price. They are to look at that and revere that and hold it with so much honor and understand like what that implies for their eternity. And Bonhoeffer was serious and did not want people to cheapen the grace of Christ so that it gave them a pass to sin. The second point that I saw very evidently in the book was that he was calling people to a discipleship lifestyle based on the calling of Jesus. He very evidently made points that people are called into discipleship by Christ and to live lives with their eyes fixed on him in all things, that they might be able to obey his call. This was so important, and he made many points to explain that people were called to obedience. The most significant quote that I found in his exposition from the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 6 was that only the obedient obey, or only the believers obey, and only the obedient believe. People that believe in Jesus are willing to obey what he calls them to do, which is lay down their lives at the foot of the cross and die. And only those that are obedient, only those that are obeying what Christ called them to do, which is die, will believe that Jesus is enough in fulfillment. And it's just one of the most significant things that he says in the entire book. And then the final point that he makes is that a church must be strong in the righteousness of God. So he argues for the point that, in the last chapter, he just hits home on the fact that our righteousness is imputed to us by Christ from God. It is God's own righteousness that stands in our path of wrath. And he is just so headstrong and serious about our righteousness coming from God alone, and how that looks as a church, how that looks in baptism, how it looks in taking the Lord's Supper, how it looks in our lives together as a church. All of that is significant to him, and he makes very strong points about all of them. One of the very key thing that I really disagreed with him on was just a theological disagreement about baptism. He was from the Lutheran tradition. He quoted Luther. He had a lot of Lutheran theology in his book, but he had a whole chapter on baptism, which I just don't agree with. He made so many great arguments as to what baptism is and how we are dying with Christ and being raised up to life with him. But at the very end of the chapter, he takes all of that and just says, and this is why we should do infant baptism, which has no correlation to anything that he argued for. Everything that he argued for would have made more sense for a believer's baptism background, but he argued very heavily for a belief in infant baptism. and I just disagree with that, and it was a very difficult chapter for me to catch. This book was significant to Christians in his time and in that era because people were falling into heresy, people were being misled and killed for their faith. So to uphold Christ as the fullness that they need, as the perfect imputed righteousness that they need to hold on to, and to hold on to the old covenant, all of these things were important. And so to call people to a discipleship of Jesus Christ was humongous in that time. And now it's affecting people in the same way of like, we need to be serious about the things of God. We need to be serious about Christ and about his church and how we live our lives, and if we're walking this narrow path that he has called us to, because the outside world knows us by our fruit and knows us by the way that we love one another. And it's very evident that in this time frame it's so easy to get enraptured in everything else that's going on around us and miss the joy of being in Christ. I highly recommend this book. It will challenge you and make you think, and I have appreciated many of Bonhoeffer's thoughts. So thank you guys, and I hope this is helpful for your understanding of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Discipleship.